What up, perps? Kid Copious, back in effect. Purple State Party, you know what we're doing here. We're repping America, the center, and common sense. And we really need common sense to win. You know, we need to start looking at that as a country. It's not about what tribe wins, it's does common sense win? Does somebody who can do the job and deliver on their promises, are they the people who are going to get in? We've got elections coming up, like less than 2 years now. And we got to really think, like, which way do we want to go? I don't know if we're on the right track 100%, but I know we're on a better track than we were 4 years ago. And I know that a lot of the instigators are being exposed. A lot of the waste, the fraud, the lies are being exposed. We're seeing it. People are waking up to it. And, we need to remember that the next time we go to the ballot box. We need to remember what we've seen. Hey, this is the week of P. It was supposed to be all about Purple State, but unfortunately the world got in the way. So a lot of this is going to be on pathetic people, politicians, and political groups. So let's kick it off. So Kristi Noem had a press conference, and a guy by the name of Alex Padilla, a senator from California, of course, decided that he was going to be the latest rebel to go out there and, agitate and resist and all this crap. And so without, wearing his security badge, without identifying himself, he just started shouting questions over Kristi Noem as she spoke. He was warned by the security detail there to, shut up, let her finish. The questions will come at the end. Of course, he didn't want to do that, so he started proceeding towards the podium, at which point he was physically escorted out of the conference room. As he's being led out, he turned physically on the police officers. And rule number one, do not act aggressively towards cops or they will take you down. And they took him down. And a lot of people are trying to say that, this was an overreach by the right. Nobody really wants to admit it was just a political stunt by the left, but that's what it was. They don't have a common sense answer, rebuttal, so to speak, to what Kristi Noem was saying or what other Republicans say. So they just shout questions. It reminds me of Scientology. When you question Scientology, they start screaming at you about what's your crimes. And we've seen that in street interview after street interview after street interview, where conservative people go out and just try to talk to people. Okay, maybe they're trying to instigate people to get a little more views on their channel, but that really depends on the channel. Charlie Kirk just sets up a little booth and fields questions and debates with people. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I see in response to that is when a bit of logic or common sense or a truth is brought up, the left often just starts screaming at people, and that's what Padilla was doing. He wants to be maybe a governor or a president. And so this is how he's going to get himself noticed. They say there's no such thing as bad press. And we really have accentuated that. Too many people buy into people doing things for the so-called bad press. Another person who does that, of course, is Greta Thunberg. She was on a yacht sailing to Gaza to bring humanitarian aid. Their ship was boarded. All of the activists were rounded up, taken to an Israeli port. They were offered to see the October 7th video, to see the truth of it. But, they didn't want to watch it because they don't want to know the truth. Hamas attacked on October 7th, not just to kill Jews, because that's not who they killed. They killed all kinds of people. They killed even a guy, I believe, from South Korea. But their whole aim was to disrupt Israel's peace deal with Saudi Arabia. They don't want Arab nations making peace with Israel because that contradicts their hardline religious views of destroying Israel. But anyhow, Greta Thunberg, she goes on all of the socials and all that stuff talking about being kidnapped. And, she never asked about the hostages that are still being held there. Hamas is holding dead bodies as hostages. I mean, that really about sums it all up. But, she's a paid activist, much like those stirring up trouble in L.A. I want to look at the L.A. situation because it's, It's the big city near where I live. I don't like it seeing it being vandalized. I've lived through several different riots in this area, and I've seen when it's done. Corporations are able to rebuild, but the mom and pops are put out of business. You know, so let's try to take an honest look at this. Let's look at some of the facts that have led to this. You know, under Biden, we had mass amounts of people, 10 to 14 million people, stream across our border illegally or by cheating using Biden's so-called amnesty, fake legal entry, whatever the fuck. You know, and then you have California being a sanctuary state. Now, I believe in a sanctuary state, but in a different way than what California does. You know, if somebody helps law enforcement or is a victim of a crime or is in an accident, something like that, where an illegal immigrant comes in contact with the police, I don't think the police need to tell ICE. You know, cool. All right. Some criminals might be freed, but many more innocents won't suffer. But California's sanctuary state shields criminals and criminals alone, because they're supposed to notify ICE when they have arrested somebody for a crime and that person is in the country illegally. You let ICE know. And that leads to 100% of criminal illegal aliens being deported. It assures that. If California reports all the criminal illegal aliens, then only those people would be going home. But too many people came in, so there had to be a response. And the response, unfortunately, is coming down on one community the hardest. And it's a community that, you know, I don't know how to phrase it, but I feel a part of. The culture of Mexico, the food of Mexico, the people of Mexico, all of that. Like, I have close ties to that. My entire team at work is Mexican. You know, I don't care how they got here. I don't care how their parents got here. I don't care how their grandparents got here. These are good people. And these are the people who are now being put in the crosshairs. And it's unfortunately, for, I guess, the only way to phrase it is a somewhat valid reason. You know, but anyhow, you know, a lot of Mexican immigrants came into our country illegally. Some of them eventually took different amnesty programs. But for the most part, you know, they're proud Americans. They're proud of their heritage from where they came from and where they are now. You know, but they're not much of a burden. You know, they come in, they stay with family, they work with family. They don't necessarily take a lot out of the system. And if they take a little bit, okay, whatever. It's not that big of a deal. It's not much of a burden. But along the way, you know, immigration officials figured out where these people would go, such as a Home Depot. You know, that's where you're going to find, you know, predominantly Hispanics looking for work. The sad part is oftentimes they're being essentially pimped by cartels and things like that. But again, you know, they're just trying to get by. They come up here and they try to get by and they send money back to Mexico. I don't really think that's that big of an issue. But, you know, under Biden, people were coming in from around the world. Where did the Chinese, the Ghanaians, the Lithuanians, Iraqis, Haitians, where did they go? Well, we don't really know. We don't really know, and that's the truth of the matter. We don't really know where some of these other groups dispersed to. But, you know, you run into these cases like this asshole from Pakistan who milks the system while hiding their own wealth. They're collecting money from the government, but they own expensive cars and they own homes, and yet they're collecting money. They came into the country illegally. They got a free pass from Biden. You know, recently in the news, there was an illegal Chinese man who somehow purchased a gun store in Texas. And they recently arrested him because you know what he was doing? He was sending weapons to North Korea. We don't need that. But anyhow, back to the LA situation. You know, a lot of times the liberals say that we should go after the money. You know, the people who are hiring illegal aliens. Why aren't we going after them? Well, that's what they did. This Aspirations clothing company owned by a Chinese guy. He's been in trouble before for various different business crimes and things like that. But that was what the raid was, the ICE raid. They went in there and they were looking for the owners of this company who were providing false documents. Okay? That's not an individual sneaking into America for a better life. That is people flaunting our laws and exploiting these workers, right? So they're getting ready to do another raid, ISIS. And they staged in a giant business complex. It was near a Home Depot. But anyhow, this assemblyman from the Paramount area erroneously figured they were going to a nearby Home Depot, and he raised the alarm. He alerted all of the, he blew the dog whistle, and they came out. But there was no raid on the Home Depot. And the worst part is that these protests and these riots are being sponsored by left-wing agitators who masquerade as migrant rights groups. And they send lots of money to Newsom. So that's one of the reasons why Newsom just lets it proceed. And we know the formula. Protest that day, draw the crowd in, get the police, edgy and standing around all day watching these people. And then at night you riot. We've seen this a dozen times now. And before people bring up January 6th, at least January 6th was about something. And at least January 6th, when people started to realize how out of control it was, they simply left. And not a lot of damage was done. Yes, people lost their lives. Yes, police officers were attacked. I'm not one of those people who thinks that the people who were arrested for attacking the police officers should be pardoned. I don't think many of them were. But this latest shit that they're pulling here in LA is about protecting illegal immigration, some of which are just violent criminals, and we know that. The numbers are bearing out. Some fled their countries from crime. They came here. Then why do they come to California? Because California's been set up as a shelter for criminals and drug dealers and drug addicts. Imagine we pay tax dollars to create a safe space for criminals. All the while, we're barely scraping by. I believe my tax here is somewhere near 26%. And I have to pay property taxes and all these other fines and regulations. And I have to pay a shit ton for my car to register it. If something breaks on like my catalytic converter that got stolen, I have to pay more for that because, California. Gavin and the Democrats put up a sanctuary wall, give health care, driver's license, cash, and other support. So, yeah, they flock here. And when Trump sent in the National Guard and the Marines to try to prevent the riots from growing, Newsom sued them. Newsom wants L.A. to burn. He doesn't even live here. And it might distract the voters from seeing all of his boondoggles, like the bullet train. L.A. is broken, and it broke, and they can't replace the infrastructure, the cop cars, and all of that. But sure, Gavin, just let it burn, And the media plays along. They like to remind us that the riots were in a small area of L.A., unlike the King riots of the past. Does it stay small? Why did it stay small? Was it the presence of the National Guard? I don't know. The worst part about it is that Gavin's automatically taking on the Trump administration. And right now, under that administration, we have a deal for the people who are here illegally. If you self-deport, we will fly you home. We'll give you $1,000, and you can apply to come here legally. I don't understand what the big deal is. They're trying. They wouldn't have to do this if California would not protect the criminals who came here illegally. But like I said before, everything the left has done in LA reflects bad on the Mexicans. You got the flags, blah, 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 blah. And those problems fall right on the Mexican community. And to a greater extent, the entire Central and South American community. Because quite frankly, sometimes it's hard to tell people apart. That's the way it is. But the real problem is all of the unvetted actors from our enemies that have come into our country. Terrorists, criminals, those are the people that we need to go after. But if California isn't going to help, then ICE is going to have to do it on their own. What do you expect? New York and LA are the two big population centers. So yeah, that's where they're going to go to start looking for these people. But, I guess the left's really, their latest cause is illegal immigration because, Palestine Hamas doesn't really look good. Just overnight, Hamas killed eight aid workers who were delivering food. That's all they were doing. They were delivering food. And they may have even taken hostages, those sick bastards. You know? But the problem that a lot of that's out there that people are starting to see is that the leaders of Hamas are billionaires living in other countries. They steal money from charities. They sell the food. They sell the medicine. So they want Hamas to be out there sowing all of this chaos, keeping everybody off balance so that we can't really see what's going on. But that's what they're doing. I mean, they took international aid and they built tunnels. How does that help? How does building infrastructure for Hamas help the people of Gaza? It doesn't. And that's the thing. They've monetized the cause, so to speak. They rail about capitalism in the West, but they do the very same thing that they claim to hate. They're stealing from the people of Palestine. When those young idiots are out there yelling free Palestine, well, first of all, you got to free Palestine from Hamas. I mean, there is a rival to Hamas in Gaza, okay? And they're trying to help escort these aid people through, and they control a little corner of Gaza where if you can get the border open, you can get aid through there. But they're being hunted by Hamas. That's the truth of the matter. The people who are trying to free Palestine, create a better Palestine, if you want to call it that, are being killed by Hamas. And that's the problem we have with a lot of these people. You know, when you're talking about the Queers for Palestine, where's the denouncement of Hamas? Where's the denouncement of hardline Islamic rhetoric? Where's the questions about why are you keeping dead bodies as hostages? Why can't you bring that up? Right? And who supports Hamas? Who gives Hamas a lot of the weapons and military equipment that they need? Iran. And I'm sure you already know where I'm going with this. Israel has run out of patience with Iran. They struck the nuclear enrichment sites. They took out top generals. They took out nuclear scientists. Watch the raid let me say that again. Watch Raid on Entebbe. You can watch the movie or the countless documentaries on YouTube. But you'll see what Israel does when they're backed into a corner. Okay? Some people say that, like the WMDs in Iraq, that Iranians having a nuclear bomb is irrelevant. But it isn't. And I'll tell you why. Iran is guided by hardline religious principles that include ending Israel. They already support the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, and other terrorist organizations around the region and around the world. They are actively trying to destroy the so-called enemies of Islam, the so-called infidels, and the Jews. And I believe that Iran would give a nuclear weapon to one of these groups to try to create some big moment or to literally destroy Israel. So Israel attacked. And of course, Iran has now fired weapons back into Tel Aviv. One of them got through. Unlike Israel, these are not targeted attacks. These are random rockets and missiles being launched into civilian centers. Because at the end of the day, Iran, much like Hamas, don't give a shit about civilians. They use their own civilians to try to further their cause. Keep in mind, the real leaders of Hamas, the people behind the scenes, are either in Iran or Dubai or hiding out wherever the hell they're hiding out. And Israel's going to start coming after them. I know Israel. I have a lot of respect for Israel. You know, that's part of that's what shaped me young in life. Was I knew rabbis, I knew Jewish families, I knew Mexican families. Okay? That's who I am. I am shaped by the people who I have met along the way. And I stand firmly with Israel. And everybody should stand firmly with Israel. Because if they can knock out Iran or get Iran to spiral into a civil war in which a more moderate government emerges in Iran, then we're not going to have all of these dollars flowing into these terror groups. And when these terror groups can't pay their fighters, the fighters might just decide to lay down their arms and get a job. All right, purple talk now. the big P. One thing about purple state that not everybody might realize is that it's purple and gray. Okay. I did that for a very simple reason. It's kind of moronically simple. You've probably already figured it out. But if you don't know, purple is the merging of the red and blue parties. And the reason why gray is the secondary color is because very few things are black and white. They really are. There's a lot of gray area out there. But there are some black and white issues. Our world is a mess. And right now in the United States, with all the issues that are facing us and our children, how are children going to survive in a world of AI and robotics? We don't know. But the politicians are enriching their lives while tearing down ours. And the media helps these kings and queens by keeping us distracted. DC insiders are manipulating stock prices. They're creating bureaucracies to further enrich their bank accounts and the bank accounts of their friends and family. In places like Texas, women lost the right to an abortion. In California, women lost spots on sports teams. They lost accolades in sports. California continues to infringe on our rights to defend ourselves. I can't carry a collapsible baton. Give me a break. You can't carry bear spray. They're going to limit how many rounds I have in my pistol? Really? Because I'm pretty sure the criminals aren't following that rule. Across the country, marijuana, weed is still illegal, even though there are very few side effects. And there's certainly very few social side effects, right? We have college campuses that are just flat out supporting terrorist regimes. They're yelling free Palestine, but they're not condemning Hamas for killing homosexuals. They're not condemning Hamas for stealing aid. They're not condemning Hamas for using the people of Gaza as a human shield. No, they just want to yell and scream and irritate people. These same college students are practicing anti-Semitic behavior. And now they're out defending illegal aliens. Our DAs, the district attorney, the top law enforcement in our states and in our cities are looking to figure out how to free criminals. Here in California, we just let drug addicts and the mentally ill randomly tear apart peaceful communities, assault people, make life miserable. And all the while, our governor is sending people cash to so-called take care of these problems. And all they're doing is facilitating it. Our social programs have literally been hijacked by money-grubbing thieves. We're seeing it constantly. And what does the politician in charge, Mayor Karen Bass, do about it? Nothing. She tries to block it. The federal government wants an audit of what's going on with these homeless programs. Nope, not going to cooperate. Even Gavin Newsom has started to ask the question, where the hell did all the money go? But is anybody investigating it? Is anybody investigating the bullet train? Where did that all go? We'll get more on that. Coming July 1st, California is going to raise gas prices through a tax by 65 cents. We're losing refineries here in California. Our gas prices are already going to go up, and California politicians are going to slap 65 cents a gallon. Okay, so if you put in 10 gallons, that's $6.50 that you're sending to them. What kind of shit is that? Who voted for that? We have the strictest rules on fuel and emissions that drive up the cost already. Who voted for that? Look at the bullet train here in California. The people in 2008 voted for it at a cost of $33 billion, and it should have been done in 2020. 2025, barely any track laid. And now it's costing hundreds of billions of dollars, and it's nowhere near complete. And it's not even going to go where they said. It's not LA to San Francisco. It's Palmdale to Gilroy. I've already discussed this, but look it up on a map. It's not going to go. Do they stop? Do they pull back and put the money into things that the rest of us actually need? No. It's a fucking faucet for money and corruption, and you could use it to, essentially bribe people into voting for you. You can give some company or some consulting group money, and then they can give some of that money back to your campaign war chest. They got $7 billion for the bullet train from Obama, and they laid not 1 inch of track. $7 billion, and nothing was done with it. It was all absorbed by corruption and greed. Now, do we want the draconian Republicans and their Puritan views? No. I like my I like my weed here. I like the community that thrives here in the LGBT sector and in some of the other sectors where we really do very well by people who need assistance. We do. I mean, California is not all bad, okay? But the Democrats are only offering us more government, more theft, more waste, ever increasing taxes, more regulations, and just opening the doors for whatever fucking insane idea comes down the pipe. We got to do better. We have to do better. I have to do better. I'm Kid Copious. I'm Purple State Party, and so are you. Love one another. Keep on grinding. And you know, when the news just wants to beat you down, stand up, shake it out, and dance it out.